The perfect betrayal. I had always believed that love was built on trust. Claire and I had been together for 10 years, married for 7. She was my world. Or at least, that's what I thought until I found out the truth. The first sign was subtle. A missed dinner, a change in her perfume, the way she guarded her phone like it contained state secrets. Then came the late nights at work, the coldness in her touch, the way she smiled at me like a stranger. I hired a private investigator, and within a week I had my answer. Claire was having an affair. Not just any affair. She was seeing David Mercer, my business partner and closest friend. The betrayal cut deeper than I thought possible. The man I trusted, the woman I loved, they had made a fool of me. But I didn't confront her. Not yet. I let the anger simmer beneath the surface, let the pain sharpen into something useful. If she wanted to play games, I would make sure she lost. Setting the trap, I started planning my revenge meticulously. I knew their affair wasn't just about passion. It was about greed. Claire had been manipulating me, subtly pushing me to move our finances into joint accounts, convincing me to shift investments into new ventures, ones secretly controlled by David. She planned to divorce me once I was financially ruined. I played along. I made it seem like I was clueless, like I still believed in her lies. I even pretended to be distracted by work, allowing her to think she had the upper hand. Meanwhile, I started moving my assets into offshore accounts, liquidating stocks and slowly diverting funds into accounts Claire and David couldn't touch. At the same time, I fed them false information. I let Claire overhear a confidential conversation about a lucrative deal I was about to close. Predictably, she relayed it to David, and he took the bait. David invested heavily, thinking he was ahead of the game, only for the market to shift dramatically in the opposite direction. He lost millions overnight. As I watched his company crumble, I prepared the final blow. The unraveling one evening, I arranged a romantic dinner at home. Candles, wine, soft music, everything designed to make Claire feel comfortable. I told her I wanted to talk about our future, that I wanted to rekindle what we had lost. She smiled, believing I was finally falling back under her spell. Then I dropped the bombshell. I slid a folder across the table, bank statements, photos of her and David together, recordings of their conversations. Her face drained of color. David's company is bankrupt, I said casually, sipping my wine. And you? You have nothing. She stammered, trying to deny it, but the evidence was overwhelming. I told her I had already filed for divorce. The house? In my name? The assets? All protected. She had spent years trying to ruin me, and now she had nothing left. And then came the final twist. I know about the offshore account you and David set up, I said. The one you were planning to run away with once I was out of the picture. Her eyes widened. She had no idea how I had found out. I leaned in and whispered, "It's empty." She lunged for her phone, probably to call David, but I stopped her. "You might want to check on him first." At that exact moment, she received a message. A news alert. David Mercer had been arrested for financial fraud. She gasped. I had made sure David took the fall for everything. She turned to me, her face a mask of horror. "What did you do?" I simply smiled. The surprising ending, I expected her to break down, to beg, to scream. But Claire was always unpredictable. She straightened, took a deep breath, and said, "You think this is over?" She stood up, walked to the door, and turned back with an eerie calm. "You ruined my life, but you forgot one thing." She leaned in, her lips inches from my ear. "I have nothing left to lose." Then she walked away, and that was the last time I saw Claire. For months, I waited, always looking over my shoulder, always expecting her to come back. But she vanished. No credit card activity, no social media, nothing. It was like she had disappeared off the face of the earth. Then, one night, I came home to find a single envelope on my doorstep. No return address, no name, just a short note. Inside, I'm still here, and I'm watching. The game wasn't over, not yet. The perfect betrayal. The final twist months passed. I thought I had won. Claire had vanished, David was rotting in prison, and my life was back on track. But paranoia clung to me like a second skin. Her last message haunted me. I'm still here, and I'm watching. I changed my locks, installed security cameras, hired private security. Nothing. No sign of Claire. Maybe she had just wanted to mess with my head. Maybe she was too afraid to strike back. Then, one night I woke up to a strange sound, not loud, just a faint click, like a door unlocking. I reached for the gun in my nightstand, but something felt off. The air was thick, heavy, laced with an unfamiliar scent. I tried to move, but my body refused. My limbs were sluggish, my vision blurred. Poison. Shadow moved in the doorway. Claire. She walked in casually, as if she still lived here, her figure illuminated by the dim glow of the hallway light. She wore a simple black dress, her hair tied back. Elegant. Cold. "Hello, darling," she murmured, running a gloved finger along the edge of my nightstand. "Did you really think I would just disappear?" I tried to speak, but my tongue felt like lead. She sighed, shaking her head. "You always underestimated me. That was your biggest mistake." She reached into her purse and pulled out a syringe. "Don't worry. I won't kill you. That would be too easy." She leaned in, her breath warm against my ear. "You took everything from me. Now I'm going to do the same to you." Darkness swallowed me whole. The ultimate betrayal. I woke up in a hospital bed. My arms and legs felt numb, my body weak. An IV dripped slowly beside me. I tried to move. Nothing. Panic surged through me. I struggled, my breaths coming in ragged gasps. That's when I saw Claire, sitting in the chair beside me, dressed impeccably in white, flipping through a magazine. She smiled when she saw me awake. "Ah, you're up." My throat was dry. "What did you do?" She leaned forward, resting her chin on her hand. "Well," she mused, "I considered killing you, but that's so permanent, and I wanted you to suffer." She gestured around the room. "Doctors say it's some rare neurological disorder. How tragic, right? A man in his prime suddenly paralyzed. Unable to walk, unable to feed himself, unable to do anything without help." She grinned, savoring my horror. "And the best part? No one suspects a thing. You just had a sudden medical emergency." She shrugged. "What bad luck." My pulse pounded in my ears. She stood up and smoothed out her dress. "Don't worry, though. I'll make sure you're taken care of." She leaned in one last time, her lips barely brushing my ear. "After all, I'm still your wife." Then, she walked out, leaving me trapped in my own body. Helpless. Checkmate. Would you like an alternative twist where he gets a final chance at revenge? The final game. Revenge for betrayal. I spent weeks in that hospital bed, trapped inside my useless body, replaying every second of that night. Claire had won. She had taken everything from me, but she had made one mistake. She had left me alive. Mind still sharp, Claire played the devoted wife perfectly. She visited often, always bringing flowers, smiling at the nurses, ensuring I was well cared for. To the outside world, she was a grieving woman tending to her poor, crippled husband. But when we were alone, her mask slipped. She would lean in and whisper venom into my ear. "You were so clever, weren't you? Always 3 steps ahead. Look at you now." She enjoyed watching me suffer, believing I was powerless. But she had forgotten one thing. My mind was still sharp. I spent every waking moment studying her, memorizing her routines, noting the people she interacted with, searching for any weakness, and then I found it. A crack in the armor Claire had moved my assets into accounts under her name, but she wasn't as careful as she thought. She had a new lover, an ambitious stockbroker named Daniel Pierce. I overheard a hushed conversation between them during one of her visits. "You need to move the funds soon," Daniel whispered over the phone. Claire laughed softly. "Relax, love. He's not going anywhere." She planned to disappear again, this time with everything. I had to act fast. The silent war, I couldn't move. I couldn't speak properly. But I could still communicate. Barely. And I had one loyal ally left. Nate. My lawyer. My best friend. The only person who had stayed by my side. During one of his visits, I managed to blink out a message in Morse code. It took time, but he understood. CLAIRETRAPHER, Nate, sprang into action. He hired a private investigator to dig into Claire's financial movements. Within days, we had the proof. Claire and Daniel were embezzling the remaining funds and planning their escape. I just needed one final move to destroy her. The ultimate checkmate. The night before she planned to disappear, Claire came to see me. One last time. She sat beside my bed, looking down at me with fake pity. "This is goodbye," she whispered. "I would have let you die peacefully, but I wanted you to know. When I walk away, no one will remember you. You'll rot in this bed and I'll be free." She kissed my forehead, and then the door burst open. 2 FBI agents stepped in. "Claire Thompson," one of them said. "You're under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and attempted murder." Her face drained of color. "Whoa, what?" Then Nate walked in, holding up a folder. "You should be more careful about covering your tracks." He smirked. "Oh, and Daniel, he cut a deal. Turns out, he's not as loyal as you thought." Claire screamed as they dragged her away. "You think this is over? You think you've won?" I finally managed a weak smile. Checkmate. A new beginning. Months later, with therapy and determination, I slowly regained movement. First my fingers, then my arms. Eventually, I walked again. Claire was sentenced to life without parole, and I made sure she would never escape. I had won. But as I stood in my new home staring at the sunset, a familiar chill crept over me. A letter sat on my desk. No return address. Just a single line, "Enjoy your victory while it lasts." Claire was locked away, but was she really gone? Would you like to continue with Claire's next move from prison? Unraveling Claire's web, the more Nathan and I dug, the worse it got. Claire's affair was only the surface of something much deeper, something far more dangerous. The money she had siphoned wasn't just for a fresh start with David Mercer. She was planning something bigger, and she wasn't working alone. A hidden connection. Nathan's investigators discovered something chilling. One of Claire's secret accounts had a recurring transaction, monthly payments to an unknown entity. Deeper dive into the records revealed the recipient, Marlowe Consulting, a fake business, a shell corporation registered offshore. Nathan frowned as he studied the documents. This isn't just about running away. She's been funding something, or someone. The implications were clear. Claire wasn't just cheating. She was plotting something against me. I needed to know what. The man in the shadows, Nathan's investigator, a former FBI analyst named Julia Marks, managed to trace Marlowe Consulting's real owner, Elliot Crane. The name meant nothing to me, until Julia pulled up his file. Crane was a corporate fixer, a man people hired to make problems disappear. He handled financial sabotage, blackmail, and asset takeovers. Claire hadn't just been betraying me. She had hired a professional to ruin me, and she had almost succeeded. Setting a trap. If Claire had paid Crane to dismantle my life, I had to find out how much damage had already been done. Nathan suggested something bold. We let Claire believe she was still in control. Instead of exposing what we knew, we pushed back subtly. We moved my assets to untouchable accounts, cutting off any remaining access she had. We fed false information through an old friend, making Claire think I was struggling financially. And then, we set a bait. I had my banker accidentally leak information that I was liquidating a major investment, one worth millions. If Claire was truly trying to destroy me, she would try to interfere. And she did. The fatal mistake, Nathan and Julia traced a message Claire sent to Crane, demanding he fast-track the plan. But what she didn't know was that Crane was already on my payroll. Nathan had reached out to him first, offering twice what Claire was paying. And just like that, Crane switched sides. Instead of destroying me, he fed Claire false reports. She thought I was on the edge of bankruptcy. She thought she had won, so she made one final desperate move. She transferred all her stolen funds into an offshore account, preparing to flee before everything collapsed. And the moment she did, Nathan had her locked in a legal chokehold. Bank, fraud, conspiracy, financial sabotage. We had her. The confrontation the night before her arrest. Claire showed up at my house. She still believed she had the upper hand. She walked in like she owned the place, wearing that same smug smile she had given me 100 times before. But when she saw the divorce papers, the financial statements, and the copies of her transactions with Crane, her expression finally changed. I leaned forward. "You played a good game, Claire, but you made one mistake." She swallowed hard. "And what's that?" I smirked. "You underestimated me." The next morning, the FBI took her away. But was it over? As I watched her disappear in the back of the squad car, I felt something strange. Relief? Satisfaction? Maybe. But also, unease. Because Claire was a survivor. And something told me this wasn't the last time I'd see her. Would you like to continue with Claire's attempts to escape justice? The smoking gun I had suspected Claire for months. The late nights, the secret phone calls, the unexplained transactions. But suspicions weren't enough. I needed proof. And when I finally found it, it was far worse than I ever imagined. Claire wasn't just cheating. She was planning to ruin me. Following the trail, Nathan and his investigators traced Claire's financial movements, and we finally hit gold. A hidden account used for private transactions, expensive gifts, luxury hotel stays, and recurring payments to David Mercer. David wasn't just her lover. He was her accomplice. They weren't just planning to be together. They were setting me up. The ultimate betrayal. Nathan's team recovered deleted messages between Claire and David. The contents made my blood run cold. Claire, he doesn't suspect a thing. I'll have control of everything soon. David. Good. Once the assets are transferred, we move forward. Claire. He'll never see it coming. She had planned it all along. The affair was just a distraction. The real goal? To destroy me financially and leave me with nothing. The tipping point. The final piece of evidence came from a hidden camera. One of Nathan's private investigators had followed Claire to a secluded hotel, room 405, and when we played the footage, I saw it with my own eyes. Claire and David, together, laughing, kissing, plotting. I had everything I needed. Now it was my turn. Would you like to continue with how the protagonist sets a trap for Claire and David? David Mercer's regret. David Mercer had always considered himself a calculated man, a risk-taker, but never reckless. His affair with Claire was supposed to be a power move, a way to get ahead. Now, it was his downfall. The fallout begins when the investigation into Claire's financial schemes went public. David's name was everywhere. The board of his firm called an emergency meeting. His wife, Emily, filed for divorce. His clients dropped him overnight. At first, he tried to contain it. He told himself Claire would fix this, but then the headlines dropped. Financial fraud scandal, Claire Thompson, and David Mercer under investigation. And suddenly, he was alone. A desperate betrayal. Claire tried to convince him to run. "We can disappear," she had whispered over the phone. "Take what we can and start over." But David saw what was happening. Claire wasn't planning for them. She was planning for herself. That's when he made his choice. He turned on her. He cut a deal with the authorities, exposing Claire's entire scheme to save himself. But by then, it was too late. A man with nothing. Left David Mercer lost everything. His career was destroyed. No firm would ever touch him again. His wife took everything in the divorce, leaving him drowning in legal fees. His reputation was ruined, and worst of all, Claire had set him up too. She had been shifting the worst of the blame onto him all along. David finally understood. He was never her partner. He was her pawn. And now, he had nothing. Would you like to continue with Claire's downfall or David's next move? The perfect revenge, I had all the evidence. Claire's affair, her financial sabotage, her conspiracy with David Mercer. But I didn't just want to expose them. I wanted to destroy them. Every move I made from that moment forward was calculated. This wouldn't just be justice, it would be a reckoning. Step 1. Isolate the targets Claire and David thrived when they had control. I needed to strip that away, severing Claire's finances. Nathan quietly froze her secret accounts. Her offshore funds redirected and flagged for fraud. She woke up one morning to find herself broke. Turning David against her, I had evidence that Claire was setting him up to take the fall. Anonymously sent him copies of their financial records, except this version made it look like she had funneled all the stolen money in his name. It didn't take long before David panicked. With no money and no trust between them, they began to turn on each other. But I wasn't done yet. Step 2. The public humiliation. Claire had always been obsessed with appearances. So I made sure her downfall was as public as possible. I leaked her affair to her professional network, ensuring she became a scandal in the industry. The financial fraud? Turned over to authorities. Now the FBI was involved. David's wife, she, received a full dossier of his betrayal, ensuring she took everything in the divorce. The moment the news broke, Claire's phone wouldn't stop ringing. First, her friends abandoned her. Then, her boss fired her. And finally, her lawyer refused to represent her. Checkmate. Step 3. The final blow. With Claire cornered and David in full survival mode, I set up the last piece of my revenge. I arranged a meeting between them, one final confrontation. I made sure it was recorded and what I caught on tape. David, in desperation, admitting to everything, the affair, the fraud, Claire's plan to ruin me. And then came the best part. Claire confessing too. She had no idea she was sealing her own fate. That footage went straight to the prosecutors. The very next morning, Claire and David were both arrested. It was over. Victory. Or something else? Watching Claire being led away in handcuffs should have felt like the ultimate triumph. And yet, I knew this wasn't the end, because Claire wasn't the type to accept defeat, and something told me she'd be back. Would you like to continue with Claire trying to escape justice? Claire's downfall begins. Claire sat in the cold, gray interrogation room, her perfectly curated life falling apart around her. She had spent years building the perfect image, successful, admired, untouchable. Now, she was a fraud suspect, a disgraced adulteress, a criminal, and she knew exactly who had done this to her. Me. The charges stack up. Nathan made sure the prosecution went all in. Claire was facing wire fraud, her hidden financial transactions, forgery, faking my signature on legal documents, conspiracy to commit fraud, her plan with David Mercer, and thanks to the recorded confession, Her case was practically bulletproof. David Mercer? He was already cutting a deal, throwing her under the bus in exchange for a reduced sentence. Claire was alone, destroying every escape route. Claire was a survivor. I knew she'd try to find a way out, so I made sure she had none. Her lawyer quit once he saw the mountain of evidence against her. Her assets were frozen. She couldn't even afford bail. Her reputation was in ruins. No one wanted to be associated with her. For the first time in her life, Claire was powerless. But she wasn't done fighting yet. Desperation sets in. Claire tried everything to escape justice. She begged David to retract his statement. She tried to manipulate me, sending desperate letters from jail. She even threatened to expose secrets about my past. But it didn't matter. I had outmaneuvered her at every turn. And when the trial finally began, the verdict was inevitable. The final judgment. The courtroom was silent as the judge delivered the sentence. Guilty on all counts. Sentenced to 12 years in prison. I watched as Claire's face twisted in disbelief. She turned to me, eyes burning with hatred. "You think this is over?" she hissed. I just smiled. "It is for you," as the guards led her away. I felt the weight of her betrayal finally lift. But deep down, I knew the truth. Claire wasn't the type to accept defeat. And if she ever got the chance, she'd come back for revenge. Would you like to continue with Claire trying to escape from prison and plotting her revenge? Claire's last desperate move. Prison was suffocating. The cold walls, the endless routine, the knowledge that she had lost. Claire had always been in control, manipulating, deceiving, winning. Now, she was just inmate. BAP 6294, and that was something she refused to accept. David Mercer's ultimate betrayal. Claire had counted on David to save her, but when she reached out from prison, David was nowhere to be found. Instead, he was living a new life. He had cut a deal with prosecutors, receiving only 3 years in minimum security. He remarried to a younger woman, flaunting his new life in the media. He moved on. Claire had betrayed many people in her life. But this felt personal. She had risked everything for David, and he had walked away unscathed. Claire hated me. But now, she hated David more, and she wanted revenge. An escape plan is set in motion. Claire was resourceful. Even behind bars, she still had connections. She started reaching out to old allies, whispering promises, making deals, a corrupt guard willing to look the other way, a fellow inmate with outside contacts, a hidden stash of money she had never touched. Slowly, a plan formed. One night during a scheduled prison transfer, Claire disappeared. And just like that, she was gone. Back from the dead, the news broke 2 days later. Convicted fraudster Claire Thompson escapes custody. Authorities warn she may be dangerous. I read the headline twice. I had won. I had destroyed her. And now, she was coming back. The calm. Before the storm, Claire's escape shook me, but I had seen enough of her to know this wasn't over. She wouldn't just disappear. No, Claire would come for me, and this time, she'd be more dangerous than before. A new weapon. Claire had always been manipulative, but now she had nothing to lose. She was dangerous, and that made her unpredictable. She had vanished into the shadows, but the world she had left behind was still littered with her contacts. People who owed her favors, criminals who feared her, and dangerous allies she could trust. She didn't just want revenge. She wanted to destroy everything I had, and I knew she'd start with the most vulnerable thing I had left, my family. The first strike. It began with a call. Late one night, my phone rang. I hesitated before answering. Hello? The voice on the other end was soft, almost a whisper. "I have your son," Claire said, and I felt the blood drain from my face. She had managed to track down Tommy, my teenage son, at a school event, and now he was a pawn in her game. "You know how this works, don't you?" Claire continued. "If you want him back, you'll come to me. No cops, no tricks." My mind raced. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I had made a vow never to let her destroy me again. But this was beyond anything I had imagined. The trap said I knew I had to play it carefully. Claire had done this before, using fear and manipulation to control the people around her. But I wasn't the same man who had let her walk all over me years ago. I made my own plan. I couldn't risk her escaping again. She would do whatever it took to erase me from her life. So I contacted a private security firm and made arrangements to have her location tracked discreetly. Every move she made would be under surveillance. It wouldn't take long to find her. The final confrontation. The location Claire had chosen was a dilapidated warehouse on the outskirts of the city. An abandoned place, perfect for hiding, perfect for staging her revenge. I walked in, alone, knowing she was waiting. The tension in the air felt thick, suffocating. She was standing there, a silhouette in the shadows, smiling. "You came," she said, the familiar venom in her voice. "I'm not here for a negotiation," I replied, voice cold. Claire took a step forward. "No, I'm the one who gets to make demands now. You think you've won, but you've only pushed me to my limits." Her eyes gleamed with madness, and I realized in that moment she had no intention of stopping. She had gone beyond revenge. This was about her survival, and she would tear everything apart if it meant getting what she wanted. The final gamble, I had the upper hand now. I'd outsmarted her once. I could do it again. Just as Claire lunged, I triggered the silent alarm on my phone, activating the team of security agents I'd placed outside. But I wasn't relying solely on the law this time. I had to finish it, myself. I took her down with a swift, calculated move, a wrestling hold that disarmed her, knocking the weapon from her hand. She struggled beneath me, her anger reaching a boiling point. But I was stronger now. "I've played your game long." "Enough, Claire," I said through gritted teeth. "And now I'm going to finish it." Claire's last move. But just as I thought it was over, I saw her hand slip into her pocket. Before I could react, Claire pulled out a small knife, a final act of defiance. She aimed it at me. In that moment, I saw something in her eyes, not just fury, but desperation. Her breath was ragged, and her hands shook. "You think you've won? You're wrong," she spat, her voice venomous. "You're not getting away from me again." But I wasn't afraid. With a swift motion, I knocked the knife from her hand, and the moment was over. The end of Claire Thompson. When the authorities arrived, Claire was arrested. Again, but this time, she was completely broken. Her schemes, her manipulations, her final acts of revenge had failed. I watched as she was taken away, her eyes still burning with hatred, but I knew as she disappeared into the back of the squad car that this time was truly different. Claire would never come back. Rebuilding the pieces. With Claire's final defeat, a heavy weight lifted off my shoulders, but I was far from free. The past few years had been an endless storm, a whirlwind of betrayal, revenge, and endless calculations. And though Claire was now behind bars for good, I knew the consequences of this fight would linger. I was no longer the man I had been before. I had been shaped by everything I had lost and everything I had fought to survive. But I couldn't live in the past forever. Mending the bonds. The first and most important thing I did was focus on Tommy. I had almost lost him, but we were safe now. The time I spent rebuilding our relationship was invaluable. I knew I had to be there for him, not just as a father, but as a guardian. Tommy had been through his own hell. his mother's betrayal, her disappearance, and the threat of losing his father. I wasn't going to let that define him. We spent time together, just the two of us. We went camping, reconnected over simple things, and slowly began to heal. But healing wasn't instant. It would take time, rebuilding trust. There was also Lena, my partner, the woman who had stood by my side when everything seemed hopeless. She had supported me through every dark twist of the journey, never once questioning my need for revenge. But she had also seen me change. I was more distant now, more reserved, less trusting. She deserved more than a man who was haunted by the past. But rebuilding us meant confronting my demons and facing the uncertainty of the future. Lena was patient, understanding, but I could see the strain in her eyes. "I don't know how to help you anymore," she admitted one night as we sat on the balcony watching the stars. "I don't know how to help myself," I replied honestly. A new path. I knew that, to move forward, I had to find a new purpose. My life couldn't just be about survival anymore. I had to redefine what success meant. I closed the book on the past, the betrayals, the schemes, the constant manipulation, and I found a new challenge, starting fresh. I returned to my work, rebuilt my career from the ground up, and focused on building a legacy not of revenge, but of redemption. The darkness that had consumed me for so long slowly began to fade. I didn't need to keep fighting anymore. The final lesson. Though Claire's shadow would always loom in the background of my life, I had learned one powerful truth through everything. You can't keep running from your past. The only way out is to face it and let go. With that understanding, I was ready to move on. And as I looked ahead, I knew one thing was certain. The story of Claire Thompson and of my revenge was finally over. The future was mine. Would you like to explore how the protagonist continues to evolve in this new chapter of his life, rebuilding the pieces? With Claire's final defeat, a heavy weight lifted off my shoulders. But I was far from free. The past few years had been an endless storm, a whirlwind of betrayal, revenge, and endless calculations. And though Claire was now behind bars for good, I knew the consequences of this fight would linger. I was no longer the man I had been before. I had been shaped by everything I had lost and everything I had fought to survive. But I couldn't live in the past forever. Mending the bonds. The first and most important thing I did was focus on Tommy. I had almost lost him. But we were safe now. The time I spent rebuilding our relationship was invaluable. I knew I had to be there for him, not just as a father, but as a guardian. Tommy had been through his own hell. His mother's betrayal, her disappearance, and the threat of losing his father. I wasn't going to let that define him. We spent time together, just the two of us. We went camping, reconnected over simple things, and slowly began to heal. But healing wasn't instant. It would take time, rebuilding trust. There was also Lena, my partner, the woman who had stood by my side when everything seemed hopeless. She had supported me through every dark twist of the journey, never once questioning my need for revenge. But she had also seen me change. I was more distant now, more reserved, less trusting. She deserved more than a man who was haunted by the past. But rebuilding us meant confronting my demons and facing the uncertainty of the future. Lena was patient, understanding, but I could see the strain in her eyes. "I don't know how to help you anymore," she admitted one night as we sat on the balcony watching the stars. "I don't know how to help myself," I replied honestly. A new path. I knew that, to move forward, I had to find a new purpose. My life couldn't just be about survival anymore. I had to redefine what success meant. I closed the book on the past, the betrayals, the schemes, the constant manipulation, and I found a new challenge, starting fresh. I returned to my work, rebuilt my career from the ground up, and focused on building a legacy not of revenge, but of redemption. The darkness that had consumed me for so long slowly began to fade. I didn't need to keep a new beginning. As time passed, I started to feel the weight of the past lifting off me. Every day felt like a fresh start, and yet, there were days when I was haunted by the ghost of Claire's betrayal. It wasn't easy to silence those memories, but the more I focused on the future, the less power the past had over me. Building bridges, rebuilding relationships was still a work in progress, especially with Lena. She had been my anchor through the darkest parts of my life, but I realized that I couldn't just hold on to her without offering her something real. One evening, we sat across from each other at the kitchen table, no longer talking about the past. It was time for us, for me to be present in the here and now. "I want to do this right," I said softly. "I've been stuck in a place where I couldn't see anything beyond the pain. But I'm here now. For you. For us." Her eyes softened, and for the first time in years I felt a flicker of hope. "I'm willing to try," she replied, her voice steady yet vulnerable. "But we can't keep running from what we've been through." And we didn't. We spoke openly about our fears, our mistakes, and our hopes for the future. It wasn't easy, but slowly, we started building something that felt real again, finding peace. The biggest change came from within. I spent hours meditating, reflecting on everything I had gone through, the betrayals, the heartbreak, the revenge. I realized that I had been living for so long with the mindset of victimhood. But that wasn't who I was anymore. I had overcome. I had survived. And now, I needed to thrive. It wasn't just about success or vengeance. It was about peace. I began to focus on what I could control, on how I could contribute to the world in a way that made a difference. New challenges, new horizons. I took on a new challenge, helping others who had gone through what I did. I reached out to support groups for people who had been betrayed, who had lost everything to manipulation and deceit. Using my own story, I began to help others rebuild their lives, giving them the tools and guidance to move forward. It wasn't about changing the past. It was about empowering others to change their futures. A future to build years passed, and life began to feel like it had a sense of balance. Tommy, now an adult, was thriving. Lena and I were finding new ways to connect, to build something sustainable and meaningful. But perhaps the greatest victory wasn't the world I had rebuilt around me. It was the one I had rebuilt inside myself. I no longer needed revenge to feel alive. I didn't need to be the man who fought wars in the shadows. I was the man who had come to terms with his past and stepped into his future with open eyes. Would you like to continue exploring the protagonist's future, or focus on a specific part of this new chapter of his life? A new purpose. The years that followed were defined by personal growth and a profound sense of purpose I had never known before. I was no longer defined by the chaos of my past or the shadow of Claire's betrayal. I was focused on the present and, more importantly, on the future. Giving back as I helped others rebuild their lives, I began to understand that true healing comes from helping others in their journey. The more I reached out, the more I saw the ripple effect it created. I started a foundation dedicated to helping individuals who had been victims of manipulation, fraud, and betrayal. People like me who had to piece together their lives from broken shards. I spent countless hours speaking, mentoring, and offering a hand to those who had lost their sense of direction. Through this, I realized that my story wasn't just mine anymore. It had become a beacon for others who needed to know that they could rise above the wreckage of their past. Building a legacy, it wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about leaving behind a legacy that mattered. I began writing, a memoir that detailed my journey from betrayal to redemption. The process was cathartic, but more than that, it allowed me to reach an even wider audience. The book wasn't just my story. It was the story of anyone who had ever felt lost, hurt, or betrayed. People reached out to me. Thousands of letters from strangers who had read the book and found a piece of themselves in my words. It was humbling, and at the same time, it gave me a profound sense of purpose. Reconnecting with Lena and I had made progress. There were moments, fleeting but beautiful, where we could just be. But it hadn't been easy. The wounds I carried had bled into our relationship, and though we had learned to talk, I knew I still had work to do to rebuild her trust. But we kept working on it, step by step. I made her a promise. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. Those words, spoken quietly in the middle of an ordinary evening, held so much weight. We had fought through the storm, and though the scars would always remain, they were no longer the story. The story was what we built from those scars. A new horizon. I had spent so long trapped in the pursuit of revenge, so deeply embedded in the pain, that I had forgotten what it felt like to dream. But now, I had the room to dream again. I was unburdened, finally free to explore life without the constraints of anger or past trauma. It felt like I had crossed a line into a new chapter, where every day could hold the possibility of something new. Maybe the past was still there, a chapter I couldn't forget, but it didn't define me anymore. I had finally stepped into my own life, a life where I was no longer chasing the shadows of a woman who had once tried to destroy me. Instead, I was embracing the light, the potential to grow, love, and live fully. The final step forward. With every passing day, I began to feel more at peace. The anger that had once consumed me, the need to get even, to make Claire pay, slowly faded into the background. It wasn't just that I had won. It was that I had let go of the darkness that had held me captive for so long. But even with all the progress I had made, there were moments when doubt crept in. The past was never truly gone, and the scars Claire had left behind were still there, buried under the surface. I had faced a lot of battles, but the hardest one was still to come, the battle to finally forgive myself. Learning to forgive one evening, as I sat by the window watching the city lights flicker, Lena joined me. She didn't say anything at first, just sat there beside me, our silence comfortable in its own way. After a while, she spoke softly. "You've come so far. I don't think you realize how much you've changed." I didn't answer at first. What was there to say? The changes felt almost imperceptible, small moments that added up over time, but there was something in her voice, an understanding that I had spent years avoiding. I don't know if I'll ever be able to completely let go of what happened, I admitted, but I'm working on it. She looked at me, her eyes steady. The first step is being kind to yourself. Those words hit me harder than anything else she had ever said. I had spent years battling, fighting to make things right, to destroy those who had wronged me, but I had never given myself the grace to heal. The journey of self-discovery, over the next few months, I began focusing on myself. Not just the man who had been betrayed, but the man I wanted to become. I spent more time traveling, seeking out new experiences that didn't involve reliving the past. I took up new hobbies, joined new social circles, and pushed myself to break out of my comfort zone. It was as if the world was suddenly wide open, and I had the freedom to explore it with fresh eyes. But the most profound change was in the way I started to see myself. I was no longer just a survivor of betrayal. I was a man who had lived through the storm and come out stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. Building a future together, Lena and I, too, had started to rebuild our relationship, not just as a couple, but as individuals who had grown and changed. We found new ways to connect, no longer burdened by the weight of the past, but focused on the promise of the future. "I don't need you to be perfect," she told me one night. "I just need you to be here." That was the moment I realized we were both enough. The next chapter. Looking out at the horizon, I knew that the past would always be part of me, but it didn't have to dictate my future. I had taken the hard road, fought my demons, and come out on the other side a stronger version of the man I had once been. But now I was ready for peace, not just within myself, but in every aspect of my life. I would continue to help others, to share my story, but the fighting, the revenge, the obsession was over. It was time to live. Embracing new horizons. The months went by. I began to understand that true freedom didn't just come from letting go of the past. It came from embracing the present and the future with open arms. The work I had put into myself, into healing, had finally started to take root. My life, once defined by bitterness and revenge, now felt full of possibilities. The pieces of my past were no longer chains. They were lessons, finding meaning in new challenges. My foundation continued to grow, becoming a cornerstone of my new identity. I wasn't just helping others rebuild, I was teaching them to thrive. People began reaching out, seeking not only help, but guidance, and I was there to offer it. But the real reward wasn't the gratitude they gave. It was the knowledge that I had transformed my pain into something powerful for the world. One day, a young man came to me, his eyes heavy with a sorrow I recognized all too well. He had been left alone, betrayed by those he trusted, and he was lost. We sat in the quiet of my office as I listened to his story. "I don't know where to go from here," he said, voice shaking. I looked him in the eye, recognizing the same despair that once consumed me. "You don't need to have all the answers, right now, but you can start with small steps and know that in time things will get better." That moment reminded me of why I had made the choice to rebuild, not for the vengeance, not for the closure, but for moments like this, where I could give others the hope I once didn't have. Reconnecting with the world, but even with all the progress, I knew I wasn't done yet. The world had changed so much, and there was a part of me that longed for new experiences. I traveled more, allowing myself to explore new cultures and new perspectives. Each journey, whether to a distant country or a nearby town, added layers of richness to my life. I met new people, some who were like me, people who had been broken, who had been betrayed, and some who had only begun to understand how strong they could become. Lena and I grew together, not just as partners, but as best friends. There was a sense of trust between us that felt like a new beginning, something we built every day through open conversations and shared moments. We traveled together, explored the world, and shared laughter. But there were also still quiet moments when we would sit together at night, talking about everything we had been through, how far we had come, and how much further we could go, together. Creating a lasting legacy, my memoir became a tool for change. I used it as a stepping stone to further my mission, speaking at events and organizing workshops. More people than I could have ever imagined reached out, sharing how my story had helped them. But the true legacy I was building wasn't in the recognition or the accolades. It was in the lives that had been changed. A full circle, one quiet evening, after all the work was done, I sat in my study. The city was calm outside the window, the lights soft against the night sky. Lena walked in, her smile warm and comforting. "Have you had time to think about what's next?" she asked. I paused, reflecting on everything that had happened. The journey, the pain, the redemption. There was no rush anymore, no pressure to seek revenge or chase after something elusive. I had finally found my own path. and I knew that the next chapter would unfold in its own time. "I think I've been exactly where I needed to be," I said, my voice steady but full of emotion. "But what's next? I guess that's up to us, together, embracing the future." The future stretched out in front of me, wide and full of possibilities. I was no longer a man haunted by the past or driven by vengeance. I was a man who had rebuilt, not just his life, but his sense of self. And as I walked into this new chapter, I knew that the most important thing wasn't the past. It was the choices I made now, the people I connected with, and the ways I could continue to grow and evolve. There would be more challenges ahead. But I was ready. For once, I knew that I could face whatever came my way. Would you like to explore how the protagonist continues to grow, or would you prefer to shift focus to another part of his journey? Living in the moment time seemed to flow differently now. Where once I had been obsessed with getting even, proving something, and battling ghosts, I found peace in the present. The stillness of life became a comfort, something I hadn't fully appreciated before. I had once been driven by pain and revenge, but now I was driven by the possibility of joy, the simple moments that made life worth living. It was a strange but beautiful transformation. Each day felt like a blank canvas, and I was the artist. What I created from it wasn't just the product of my choices, but the result of years of growth, learning, and healing. Expanding my horizons, one day, I stood on a cliffside, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The colors in the sky were breathtaking, as if the world itself was reminding me that there was beauty in change. In the past, I had viewed life as a battle, but now, I saw it as an unfolding story, one where the scars weren't flaws, but reminders of how far I'd come. I had recently started taking art classes, something I had never imagined doing in my former life. I had always viewed creativity as something outside of my reach, a luxury I couldn't afford. But now, I found myself exploring it, channeling my emotions and thoughts into paintings that spoke more than words ever could. Lena watched me during one of my sessions, a quiet smile on her face. "You've come so far," she said softly. I looked up at her, wiping my brush across the canvas. Maybe I'm finally starting to understand what it means to live instead of just survive. Building a family, it wasn't just about the past anymore. I had a new focus, building a future. I'd always feared that the scars of my past would prevent me from fully opening up to others, from allowing myself to trust again. But as Lena and I began to consider starting a family, I knew that we were ready for the next step. Together, we began planning, dreaming about the kind of life we would offer a child. Our conversations were filled with excitement, nervousness, and hope. I wasn't the man I had been years ago, broken, angry, driven by revenge. I was now someone who had the ability to create a home, a space of love and understanding. The next phase of my legacy. The foundation continued to thrive, and so did the work I had started with my memoir. But I realized that my legacy wasn't in accomplishments or awards. It wasn't in money or fame. My legacy was in the lives I touched, in the people I helped rebuild, and the conversations that started because of the choices I had made. I began working on expanding the foundation's reach, helping those who had faced betrayal or injustice rebuild not just their lives, but their hope. It was a long journey, but every person I helped felt like a small victory, a reminder that healing was possible, no matter how broken you might feel. Unfinished business. But even in this peaceful existence, there were moments when Claire's memory would return, uninvited. I wasn't consumed by it anymore. I had let go of the need to seek revenge, and I was no longer the man I had been when I'd faced her. But there were days when I would catch myself thinking about what could have been. If she had never crossed my path, if she had never betrayed me, where would I be now? The answer didn't matter. I was here, I was whole, and that was enough. A new chapter. Lena and I continued to build our life, brick by brick. Our relationship was stronger than ever, based on shared experiences and a mutual understanding of the value of love and trust. And as I stood beside her, watching the life we'd dreamed of slowly unfold, I realized I had come to a place where the future felt wide open, limitless. The journey wasn't over, but the fighting was. The story of betrayal and revenge had played its part. The next chapter, however, would be about growth, love, and the building of something even more powerful than any revenge I could have imagined. A life well lived. I was ready to step forward, to embrace the unknown and to write the next chapter of my story, not with fear or anger, but with a heart full of hope and possibility. A new perspective. Years had passed since I'd first set foot on the path of revenge. The days blurred into one another, each bringing a new lesson, a new challenge. But now, looking back, I realized how much those years had shaped me. There was still a part of me that couldn't forget the struggle, the grief, the betrayal, the bitterness. But the part that had once clung to those emotions like a lifeline had softened. It had been replaced with something else, understanding. Life was messy, unpredictable, and often unfair. But through it all, I had learned that I could choose how I responded. I could either remain shackled by the past, or I could move forward, forging my own path, creating a family. The day Lena and I found out we were expecting was a turning point. It wasn't just the joy of new beginnings, but the realization that I had created a future that was no longer tainted by betrayal. I'd always feared that I wouldn't be able to give my child the kind of love and support they deserved, not after everything I had been through. But in that moment, I understood that I had healed, truly healed. I was ready to be the kind of father I had once only dreamed of becoming. We spent the months leading up to the birth in anticipation, our hearts swelling with excitement as we planned for the arrival of our child. The nursery was filled with soft colors and stuffed animals, a stark contrast to the chaos of my past. We talked about everything, the values we wanted to instill, the kind of love we hoped to offer. I knew that the lessons I had learned, the wisdom I had gained from surviving the darkest chapters of my life, would guide me as a parent. Legacy in the making. As time passed, my foundation continued to grow. The work I had started all those years ago had become my true calling. I wasn't just helping others recover from betrayal. I was helping them reclaim their lives, their power, their hope. I started working with more organizations, expanding the foundation's outreach. We hosted workshops, counseling sessions, and support groups. The stories that I heard from others mirrored my own in many ways, but they also revealed something important. No matter how devastating the betrayal, no matter how deep the wounds, healing was possible. It was an honor to be a part of so many people's journeys, but the work wasn't easy. There were days when the emotional weight of it all felt like too much, but I pushed through, because I knew this was what I was meant to do. This was my purpose now. Full circle. One evening, I sat in the office of my foundation, looking over the latest reports. I had just finished a session with a new group of clients, and I was reflecting on the progress we had made. It wasn't about the money or the recognition, it was about the lives we had impacted. The people who were finding healing and strength one step at a time. Lena walked in holding a cup of tea. She sat down beside me, her presence a steadying force. "You're doing incredible work," she said, her voice warm with pride. I smiled, feeling the weight of the years lift. It doesn't feel like work. It feels like my second chance. A way to give back, to make something good come from all the pain I've lived through. She took my hand, her fingers intertwined with mine. "You've come so far. We both have. As I looked at Lena, at the life we had built, I realized just how much I had changed. The man who had once been consumed by rage and betrayal had become someone who not only survived but thrived. I had rebuilt my life, my heart, and my sense of self, and I was now creating a legacy, not of vengeance, but of hope and healing. The future. Unwritten in the quiet of the night, with Lena by my side, I thought about the future. The road ahead was still unwritten, but it no longer seemed daunting. It was a road filled with endless possibilities. I had learned that life wasn't about trying to control everything or seeking revenge for the wrongs done to me. It was about embracing the beauty in the uncertainty, the joy in the everyday moments, and the peace that comes from knowing I had finally let go of the past. With Lena, with the family we were building, and with the work I was doing, I was ready for whatever came next. Because at the end of the day, I had found the one thing that no one could ever take from me: peace. And that was enough. Would you like to explore more about the protagonist's family life? Delve deeper into his work with the foundation, or take a new direction? A new beginning life had evolved in ways I had never imagined, the future unfolding with a sense of clarity and calm. But as I watched my child grow, I realized there was still much to be learned from this journey, still so much more to experience. Each day brought new challenges, of course. Parenthood wasn't always easy. The sleepless nights, the worrying about whether I was doing everything right, and the constant balancing act between work, family, and personal growth. But there was something profoundly humbling about it. Every smile from my child, every giggle, every milestone felt like a triumph, not just for them, but for me. I had come through so much darkness, so many betrayals, and now I had this pure, beautiful light to guide me forward. Returning to the roots one day, while I was sitting in the park, watching my child chase after a ball, I found myself reflecting on how far I had come. The park was peaceful, children laughing in the background, couples walking hand in hand, families enjoying the warmth of the sun. I took in the sounds of life surrounding me, realizing how much I had missed during the years I had been consumed with pain. It was then that I understood something important. I hadn't just rebuilt my life. I had rediscovered the world around me. The simple joys of life, things I had taken for granted before, like watching my child play or holding Lena's hand as we strolled together, had become my greatest treasures. But there was also a part of me that felt called to do more, to continue growing, not just for myself or for my family, but for the world. The call to make a greater impact, my foundation, had been an important part of my healing. It was a place where I had turned my pain into purpose, helping others who had faced betrayal and hardship. But as I sat there in the park, I began to think about how much more I could do. What if I could build something bigger? A global network of healing, one that reached people from all corners of the world, sharing the message that they too could overcome the darkness they faced. It was an ambitious goal, but I had learned that anything was possible if you were willing to work for it. And I knew I had the support I needed. Lena, my child, the team at the foundation, and countless others who had benefited from my journey. Together, we could create something that went beyond just survival. Reaching new heights, the idea began to take shape. I started speaking at international conferences, sharing my story on a global scale. At first, it was overwhelming. The challenges of reaching so many people, the logistics of coordinating events, and the fear of not being able to help everyone felt daunting. But with every step, I saw the impact I was making. People from all over the world reached out to share their stories, to express their gratitude, and to let me know how my journey had helped them. Each message, each email, was a reminder of the power of vulnerability and of how far I had come. The foundation grew into a larger network, offering counseling, workshops, and resources to those who had been betrayed. We began partnering with other organizations, pushing the message of healing and self-worth to even greater heights. I had taken a small spark and turned it into something far greater than I could have imagined. Life comes full circle one evening. As I stood in front of a crowd at an international conference, I spoke about the journey of recovery, about the choices we make after betrayal, and about how we could rewrite our own narratives. Looking out at the sea of faces, some hopeful, some hesitant, some still broken, I realized that I wasn't just telling my story anymore. I was part of a larger movement, a community of people who had chosen to heal, to reclaim their lives, and to move forward with purpose. After the event, a woman approached me, tears in her eyes. She thanked me for my words, for showing her that there was hope. I smiled and hugged her, knowing that this was the real work, the kind of impact I had always dreamed of making. The ongoing journey as I flew home that night, I sat quietly on the plane, reflecting on everything I had accomplished. It had been a long journey from the man I had been, the man driven by anger, betrayal, and revenge, to the man I was now. I had rebuilt my life, created a family, and made a difference in the world. But there was something even more important. I had discovered along the way I was enough. I didn't need to prove myself to anyone, least of all to the ghosts of my past. The peace I had worked so hard to find was mine to keep, and that peace was the greatest gift of all. As the plane soared through the night sky, I looked out the window at the stars. The road ahead was still unknown, but for the first time, I felt truly ready for whatever came next. Because the most powerful thing I had learned was this: the story is never truly finished. It continues with every decision, every lesson, and every choice we make.